Welcome to the Clemson Drone Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Burgett from Clemson University. Join me as I dive into the world of drone technology and explore its impact through the eyes of industry leaders. Hear how drone technology directly supports public agencies, private companies, and entrepreneurs from those leading the innovation. If you're a seasoned UAS program manager or just getting into the game, this is a place to learn from the best to help your program soar to new heights. Make sure you subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss a single episode of the Clemson Drone Podcast. At Clemson Drone, the sky is not the limit, it's just the beginning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Clemson Drone Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Burgett, and it's my pleasure to welcome Tanner Harris of Blue Nose Aerial Imaging. Tanner has a very extensive background in aviation. He was a naval aviator with the U.S. Navy. After that, he went to work for United Airlines, flying Airbus A319s and the larger 320s, as well as Boeing 757s and 767s. He currently serves as a pilot instructor at the United Airlines Flight Training Center. Recognizing the lack of consistency throughout the drone industry, Tanner built the Blue Nose Aerial Imaging franchise. And by doing this, he was able to standardize operations, develop brand name recognition, and cultivate a reputation for quality. It's a very interesting business model, which I'm looking forward to unpacking with him. So with that, Tanner, welcome to the show.
Joe, thanks for having me, sir. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, let's kind of start off this way like we like to do. Before we get into your experience with drones and aviation and all that, can you tell us a little bit about you? Where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Where do you live now?
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, primarily in Northern Virginia. My parents were all a military family, right? So that's kind of what brought us to the D.C. area. Ended up in college did undergrad at Middle Tennessee State. This is where I studied aviation.
Okay.
And then did grad school at Johns Hopkins, and currently live out here in Denver, Colorado.
Okay, beautiful. Now, did you always want to fly and be in the aviation industry, or was that something that came about a little later in life?
You know, for me, it was pretty much always there from the get-go. My parents actually met in Army flight school down in Fort Rucker, Alabama. So that was it was always kind of there from the very beginning. My uncle was an Air Force pilot. My twin brother's an Air Force pilot. You know, so it was always kind of there. So, you know, aviation's just been in the blood. That's just what we do. So it was it's just a matter of kind of finding my own path into the aviation industry and trying to figure it out and what it all means and how, you know. Do we go to college for this? Do we go to the military, or you know what's the best path for that? And kind of ended up doing all of it. So, but yeah, aviation has been there from day one.
Yeah. So both of your parents were in the Army, and they both flew. What did they fly?
Yeah. They so mom flew the Huey, and then dad primarily ended up on the Black Hawk, and he still flies every now and then. He owns a helicopter business down in Dallas, Texas. So he's still in the aviation realm. So, but yeah, that's kind of where we.
Wow, it's in your blood.
Yeah, it's in you got the bug. You know, it's in the blood from day one. Yeah.
All right, awesome. So when you were in the Navy, what type of things did you do? What type of missions and the aircraft you flew? And then can you shed a little bit of light on that, on the name of your company, Blue Nose? Yeah, for sure. So just like all naval aviators, we always start off in Pensacola, Florida, right? This is the cradle of naval aviation. So that's where we all begin, and you kind of start that training pipeline there. So we spent a couple of years down there, and ended up in Corpus Christi, Texas, was where I finished up flight school down there, and then ultimately moved up towards the Oklahoma City area and was stationed at Tinker Air Force Base. As a Navy guy living in Oklahoma, right? So I'm still trying to figure that one out. But right.
I was assigned to fly the E-6B Mercury, which is it's a Boeing 707 kind of derivative. So very similar to many folks are familiar with like the AWACS, right? The E3 AWACS with the rotating dish on top. So it's the same platform, same basic model, but there's no dish on top, and it was primarily designed to do nuclear command and control missions, actually. So this has been a mission set that was, you know, originally kind of derived back in the 50s and 60s, right? This is kind of a Cold War era mission type. So in essence, you know, we would be airborne and we would be relaying instructions to submarines or missile silos or bombers. So that's really kind of the nature of the mission. And it's fascinating because it really uses some pretty old technology. And but also some modern stuff too, right? So it's kind of a nexus of different communication platforms out there, but it is always a matter of, reliability, right? Nuclear surety and making sure that, we've got communication lines available to kind of like the National Security Council and the nuclear triad. So that's kind of what it's designed to do. But yeah, Blue Nose it is a throwback to the Navy. So if listeners are kind of familiar with kind of nautical tradition, in the Navy there's a number of different orders, right? So one that you might be familiar with is called the Order of the Shellback. And that's when you cross the equator for the first time. So there's a number of different shellbacks in the Navy, as you might imagine. But another order, which is kind of a similar tradition, is the Order of the Blue Nose. The Blue Nose is when you cross the Arctic Circle for the first time. So I want to say there's probably 10 or 11 different kind of nautical orders like that. Yeah. For us, the Blue Nose was obviously a throwback to our Navy days, and then also, I think really striving for excellence despite some pretty challenging conditions, so that for us, it kind of solved a number of different things for us. And it's always an interesting kind of story to tell too. So it's, we wanted that name to be present in people's minds. So yeah, that's the story of Blue Nose.
Yeah, no, that's super cool. And I'm a Florida native, so you said Pensacola was like the cradle of aviation. It's the cradle of all things awesome in my world. And if you think about all those badge of honors that you were talking about and crossing the equator, that sounds a lot less daunting than going into the Arctic. I can only imagine being on those boats where you've got that wind just whipping through, and it'd be a bit much for this Florida boy, I think.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. It's funny enough, I never made it up there. We came real close once when we were flying up around the UK. But yeah, I mean, actually being on the ocean and gosh, I mean, dodging icebergs, that's too much for me, man. That's not my cup of tea.
Yeah, right. Well, so, and you talked a little about your, some of the planes that you had flown, and I had mentioned some of the civilian aircraft that you've flown, all being on the larger side and all that. But then you chose to get into the UAS business. So, I mean, from an aircraft point of view, those are kind of extremes, right? You got massive, both civilian and military aircraft, and then you got the smallest, basically, that you've been looked at. So what made you want to get into the UAS business?
Yeah, I like it. There's always kind of like this competing ideology between, traditional aircraft and then the unmanned realm and kind of the autonomous features of the UAS industry right now. But, for me, it actually started back in about 2014 timeframe when I was still stationed at Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma City. And, the commercial drone industry was in its infancy. It was just coming online. Mm-hmm. People were able to access these drones and pretty sophisticated equipment at a relatively affordable cost. And so we started kind of exploring that idea, and I was chatting about it with my dad, and we kind of came up with this idea of like, well, we could pop up a drone up in the sky, make sure it had a camera on there, and then Oklahoma being Tornado Alley, right? It's the center of a lot of convective weather. The idea was, well, we could just walk up and down the sidewalk of any neighborhood and take pictures of people's rooftops and, provide that to either, the homeowner or an insurance adjuster or a roofing company or whomever it might be. So that's really kind of where the idea started. And then at least for me, life happened, right? had two kiddos, was reassigned twice with the Navy, started working for United out here in Denver. So we hadn't really done anything with that up until about 2019 when we got settled here in Denver, Colorado. So kind of revisited the idea of a drone business and what that meant and the different equipment and how to set up a business and how to build a website and branding and marketing initiatives and all the things that's kind of associated with that. And that's kind of how we got into it. But gosh, there's a lot there. Drones can do so many different things. So it's exciting, and it's, from my background as kind of in the traditional aviation sense, there's a lot of transferable skill sets into the unmanned world or the uncrewed world, I should say. So yeah, it was kind of a logical next step.
Yeah, no, it's interesting the way that you divide it up. So again, the way I phrased that question was I said, very large aircraft and then small aircraft. So I was kind of dividing the groups based off of size. And you made the distinction between crewed versus uncrewed. And obviously that makes sense, but it just wasn't where my mind initially initially went. So I'm curious because again, your whole family is in aviation. You spent a career in aviation. When you initially started looking at the small UAS, the small uncrewed, did you view them? I mean, was your first inclination that this is an aircraft? And the reason I bring this up is because my background's in construction. So when I first got into drones, I knew that the FAA license and all of the tie, but when I looked at a drone, I thought, well, this is a crane. It looks different, but a lot of the things that are similar to this is one, you got to be, you're sticking up in the air. You got your dangers are power lines. You want to stay away from and light up to stay away from manned aircraft, but it's the safeties and the programs that were similar to safe operations of a crane were so similar to me with flying a drone, and obviously differences. So my perspective was, this is a flying crane. So I'm interested in your perspective, from someone who has decades of experience in aviation. When you see a drone, do you see an aircraft or do you see something else?
Man, I love that question. I've never actually really thought about it like that, and I've not been asked that before. I think, if I were to really kind of look at it and kind of internalize what that means, I think I view it as a flying tool, right? I don't know if I would necessarily view it as this is a piloted aircraft. A lot of times I make the distinction between a pilot and an operator. And so I kind of view it as a flying tool, and that tool could have a camera on it. It could be, it could have a hose on it for like pressure washing. I mean, it could be delivering goods. So it's a platform that has a number of different functionalities. It just really kind of depends on what you want to do, right? So I kind of view it as a tool, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree too. I mean, I get asked a question, I'm sure you do too, is what drone should I buy? What should I buy? And my flip answer is like a drone is a tool. It is a data capturing device. So what is the task that you're looking to do? And then once I know what you want to do, then I can help back into what's the right tool for the right job. So no, I certainly appreciate that answer. Let me kind of dive into something else. And you were kind of talking through a little bit about why your interest was in, uncrewed aviation and walking up and down sidewalks with your dad, which is awesome. Tell me a little bit about the origin story of Blue Nose. How did you guys get started? What was the first mission type? What kind of equipment do you have? How did you get clients? So what's the origin story?
Yeah. I love talking about it because just like so many people a few years ago, the pandemic completely upended their entire life, and it really did the same thing for us. So once we had moved out here to Denver, Colorado, and kind of got ourselves established and our feet underneath us, I started to kind of revisit the idea of setting up a drone business. And this was in 2019. And I, did a bunch of research on equipment and software and how to set up a business, kind of what I was alluding to earlier. And then we launched the website in the first week of March of 2020. So it was a horrible time because the pandemic was just raging, and I mean, literally almost overnight, the airline industry just went upside down, right? I mean, it just tanked so rapidly. Yeah. And I guess for us, it was actually pretty fortuitous because within a couple days, probably about 4 or 5 colleagues of mine from the Navy or United reached out and said, "Tell us more about this drone business. What are you doing with this?" And and a lot of the questions that they had were all basically the same types of questions, right? Kind of to your point, what type of drone should I buy, right? How do I process data? How do I analyze this data? Things like that. So the more we kind of chewed on it, the more we decided to kind of approach this from a different angle. Instead of being a pure service provider, we approach it from a franchising mentality, right? And I think this is one of the strengths of any franchise model is that kind of that turnkey mindset, right? Providing solutions for franchise owners, whether that's equipment or training or marketing or branding or whatever it might be. I think that's really the strength of any franchise model is it's all kind of bundled together in a nice, neat package. And it enables people to become successful business owners in their own right. So that's ultimately what happened. The pandemic just flipped the airline industry upside down. I had to pivot into kind of a different role. And at the same time, I was really hoping to help out some other pilots too, right? A lot of our franchise owners are fellow aviators from the military or the commercial airlines, something like that. So that's really where it started. And, now we're coming up on year 4. And
Right.
it's just about adding more value to the franchise package and supporting the franchisees to the extent that we possibly can, just maximizing that, right? So, yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah. Well, and I want to get into the franchise, what that looks like and the advantages, disadvantages, and unpack that here in a second. But before we get there, so the individual missions that you started first, I mean, I'm sure like you launched a website and I hear you there and pandemic hits and, everything gets turned upside down and you go to this franchise model, which is amazing. Again, I want to talk about that here in a minute, but what were some of those first missions that you did? I'm sure you don't go from, zero, never flown a drone before to franchising in the same day, right? So, but what happened in the early days? What were some of the first type of missions that you got? What were some of the low hanging fruit, so to speak, the clients that might have been the easiest to get? And I'm asking this one because I'm just really interested about how this company started. But a lot of our audience they're entrepreneurs and they want to do something in this space too. And I just kind of want to get your perspective on where to start.
Yeah, no, I mean, a couple different things there that you mentioned. And as far as, low hanging fruit, I use that same phrase a lot, especially in relation to just kind of real estate, right? That's a very common industry use case for drone service providers. And there's a lot of people that are in that space because it's fairly straightforward, right? You just need a camera and it's a pretty basic camera. So that's kind of where we first started. We started to kind of from there look into potentially roof inspections, things like that, right? So that's kind of where it began. But when we really started to go deep into this and what Blue Nose could be and how we wanted to differentiate ourselves, we kind of kept coming back to this mentality that there's riches and niches, and we've got to be able to specialize, right? We've got to be able to do something that's different from the rest of the crowd. And we knew that the, kind of, especially the residential real estate vertical, if you will, was pretty tapped, right? That was pretty saturated, and it still is to in large respects.
Yeah,
so
barriers to entry are real low, and that's where everyone starts out. So it's pretty saturated market, as you said.
Yeah, for sure. So, we kind of wanted to step away from that a little bit and see, how we could kind of separate ourselves and build our own little corner of the market. So here in Colorado, we've got this whole new disruptive drone technology that's just kind of been unleashed on the world, and it's revolutionizing so many different things. But in Colorado, in particular, at the time, actually the cannabis industry was booming. So the idea was, well, gosh, if we can kind of pair this disruptive drone technology and then integrate it within an emerging cannabis industry, there might be some opportunities there. So that looked like, let's do a deep dive on precision agriculture and crop health assessments and stand counts and yield estimates and harvest optimization. So that's kind of where I pivoted towards. And to me, I think the agricultural aspect of remote sensing is just fascinating. I love it because there's a real art to it, but there's also some no kidding hard science there that's just prevalent and it's just critically important for a farmer or a cultivator or whomever it might be. So I think it's just a really fascinating kind of industry vertical there.
Yeah, no, it's super cool. It's funny you even bring this up. It wasn't but a couple of weeks or so ago, my wife somehow we got into a conversation about ideal careers. And if for whatever reason I couldn't be a professor and do what I'm doing now, is there any other job that I might be interested in? And farming appeals to me as a scientist because there is so much science and control of variables and statistics and just chemistry and biology and everything that goes into agriculture that it's a fascinating industry. And the fact that you're bringing a new tool to that to capture data in a new way, to bring another analytics to a process and the fact that you picked an emerging field it's just kind of the best of all the world. So really, that's brilliant. Well, let me kind of pull on that a little bit more and start talking about, the franchise size. So you have a super cool business model where you franchise the name Blue Nose to other pilots, as you said. And this is not a perfect analogy, so I'm going to say that kind of as a get-go. But I'm going to just kind of pick Subway restaurants. Again, franchising and restaurants, they seem to go hand in hand. But with a Subway restaurant, you have an individual that purchases that franchise, and they are benefited by the fact fact that they can have access to supply chains. They have a recognized brand that people are associated with. They have a sense of comfort with. They have an expectation of quality that's associated with that. A lot of the economies of scale that go into it are there. I mean, Joe's discount sandwich brand doesn't go as well as Subway. Everyone knows what Subway is. And you've doing this with the Blue Nose community, which I think is just an amazing concept. So can you talk a little about what Blue Nose Franchises program is, the strength that you guys bring to the market, the advantages, and we'll start there. And I got some follow-up questions I'm going to ask about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a really good analogy in that franchises are all, regardless of whether they're making sandwiches or flying drones, it's all under the same regulatory body, first of all, right? So there's, as you might imagine, there's quite a bit of legal implications that need to be adhered to when we're franchising, just like any business, right? So it's all underneath the Federal Trade Commission. Certain states have their own registration requirements as well. But any franchise, in my mind, that's worth its salt is going to be focused exactly on all those things that you mentioned, right? Branding, economies of scale, expediting, a well-known business that's hopefully, highly regarded in the industry. So for us, it's always about expediting their business setup process and then flattening their learning curve, right? That's really, if we're to boil it down into two things that we really want to focus on and further unpack, it is that, right? Get them set up quickly and make sure that they know what drones can do. There's, as you're well aware, there is an educational component behind drone services and what that means and the value that they can provide clients and in a number of different fields. So because of the fact that it is such a new and emerging industry, there is that kind of educational piece that we want to make sure we focus on. But to go back to where we started in.
Well, let me just jump in real quick before there's a couple of questions. So some of the things that you help out is with not just the UAS, flying part, it's the business side, right? Going in and I don't want to put more words in your mouth, but maybe helping them with a website, helping them set up their books, and a marketing campaign. Are those the type of things that you kind of step in and help out with?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And a lot of times when we're talking to like a prospective franchise owner, I really try to impress upon them that they're a business owner first and then they're a drone operator, right? So you got to have that foundation before you kind of get into the actual, the fun of flying drones. So writing business plans, coming up with, projected financials. How do we build a website? Getting them in touch with a CPA or a small business attorney. All those things. That's really kind of the foundation behind any business, right? And I think that's what's appealing about a franchise model. In a lot of people's minds, I think, is that they might not have any background in entrepreneurship whatsoever, and to be able to just go to one source and have all those answers provided is, I think, really pretty valuable. So yeah, that's where we start for sure.
Yeah, no, that's super. That's such a great model because you're and what you said, being a business person first and then a drone pilot second. I mean, that really resonates and makes a lot of sense there. So talk through a little bit about like maybe what the typical, if such an animal exists, the typical franchisees or at least a potential franchise purchaser would come to the table with. Are they exclusive to being in the military or former military? Do they need to be a certain number of states? Can they be from anywhere? Are you looking for folks that have some kind of experience in the past? Some kind of, what is the typical person that you're talking to that's looking to join the Blue Nose family?
Yeah, so usually I'd say it's one of two types of people. One, they're coming from an aviation background, and so they kind of identify, that transferable skill set that we were mentioning earlier. But they might not have any background in entrepreneurship, right? So that's where we can, provide those support mechanisms for them. Flip side, the other person is somebody who oftentimes is already in the drone space. Maybe they just got their Part 107 certificate, or maybe they've been an operator for a while and they're just, trying to plug into something a little bit broader and have some more specialized support and kind of help in that regard. So it's typically one of those two types of folks. So we really kind of cast a wide net, and we want to make sure that we can not only support them from a business setup standpoint, but also get into the weeds, right? Provide that level of training and understanding of just remote sensing broadly speaking, and how drones can help anyone from just an individual homeowner all the way out to a large scale, seed manufacturer or a farmer locally, whomever it might be, right? So there's really kind of a wide spectrum there. But yeah, more often than not, that's typically who we focus on. Yeah.
That's awesome. So let me ask another question here. One of the big advantages, as we were kind of talking about being a franchisee, is that you get the benefit of the reputation and the positive goodwill associated with that brand, right? The reputation that follows you. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm in the construction, or was in another life, was in the construction industry, and our reputation in that business is huge. If you don't have a reputation, you don't have a company. But the challenge that we had, the one of many, was that as I was a general contractor, the vast majority of the work, the actual putting, a building together, was performed by subcontractors. So our reputation for quality was directly tied to the partners that we brought on board the projects. So I'm curious with your model. I mean, again, the value of Blue Nose is lots of things you mentioned, but the reputation and the association of quality that goes along with that name. But when you franchise out, you don't necessarily have interactions with the day-to-day activities. So, how do you work that? How do you maintain your brand and reputation without direct control of the day-to-day activities of your franchisees?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things that we always emphasize is how critically important standardized scalability is. Right, so that is just the foundation behind our brand, and I think most franchises would probably agree with that. But from my background, especially from a military aviation background, and so many of our other franchisees are coming from a similar career field, standardization, checklists, training, the emphasis and focus on safety is just baked into traditional aviation careers, whether that's the military or general aviation,
Right.
the airlines, whatever it might be. So I've mentioned a couple different times about transferable skill sets, and that mentality, the mindset of, oh, we got to be certified, we got to be trained, we got to be doing this the right way, because of the fact that is not only the right thing to do from a safety perspective, but it also enhances our brand reputation. So that was always from the beginning kind of, let's take that, what we know, how to be a safe operator and understanding checklists and training and manuals and common systems, and then apply that into this new and emerging drone industry so that we could build a common recognizable brand. And then eventually, that'll enable the franchisees to become profitable in its own right. Then it's kind of, all right, well, how do we ensure that type of standardization? So that comes back to our manuals, our common operating systems, our processing software, our business development initiatives, coordinated marketing campaigns, our website, brand. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into achieving that
Right.
level of standardization. But you're totally right in that, your brand reputation will enable you to sink or swim, right? So it's critically important that the franchisees that do come on board understand that they'll have an impact on the other franchisees and vice versa. So it's in my mind, that's one of the beautiful things about it, because it is such a collaborative effort.
Right. That makes such perfect sense. So let's wrap things up in this kind of final questions kind of quickly here. But we've been talking about drones and programs. But if we can address this even more broadly than that, and you have with businesses, and again, your perspective is really just outstanding. But in your judgment, with starting a small business, and I say small business, but this could be a new vertical within an existing company, a new department within a municipality, or whatever. But with all that being said, if you could boil it down, what are the key factors that make a successful small business go, or small new department go, or be successful? What are the key factors that make it work?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think there's so many different things about that could resonate differently with different people. But I would say, first and foremost, going into entrepreneurship, regardless of whether you're flying drones or you're opening up a franchise, being a business owner is not easy, right? It can be a real punch in the gut sometimes.
Right.
So understanding why you're getting into business first and foremost, right? Like, you got to know why you're doing this. And then from there, you can kind of, elaborate, but knowing what it is that you're doing, because it just takes time. It takes time, money, resources, effort. It's not for the faint of heart. To kind of elaborate on that, and I mentioned this earlier, I think a second component would be specialization, right? I mentioned riches and niches. So understanding why you're doing it, develop a very specialized field to the extent that you can, and continue to work towards that. And then I'd say the follow-up would be this kind of third kind of pillar is do everything you can to become what we refer to as, quote, sticky in the client's operation, right? We want that client to come back to us over and over and over again, right? We want to be integral in their operation, how they run their business, and we want to be a key component of that. So I think that's what I would say. If I were to boil it down into three things: know why you're getting into business, riches and niches, and then become sticky. That's probably my core three things.
Yeah, no, I love it. Those are great. What a succinct way of putting it together, and being sticky. I haven't actually, I know exactly what you mean. I haven't phrased it that way, but that's such a colorful way of saying it that just really kind of gets to the point of it. So that's awesome. Well, we're going to leave it there. So I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much, Tanner, for being on the show. I really appreciate hearing your insights and sharing it with us.
No, Joe, I appreciate the opportunity, sir. It was a great interview, and I thank you so much. It's you guys are doing a great thing over there at Clemson, so I appreciate the chance to be with you.
Well, I appreciate that. And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Clemson Drone Podcast. We're going to do this again another couple of weeks, so appreciate that, and look forward to being in your pod and the next time and doing this again. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Clemson Drone Podcast. Don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Learn more about our online training offerings by going to clemsondrone.com. Thanks again. And remember, at Clemson Drone, the sky's not the limit, it's just the beginning.